An alien woman collapsed at his farm gate, pregnant, hunted, and desperate for help. It was raining hard, the sky was dark, the wind was strong. And thunder shook the old wooden farmhouse every few minutes. Jacob stood at his kitchen sink, washing his hands after a long day in the fields. The wheat harvest was over. But the storm had ruined his peace. He heard it suddenly. Bang, bang, bang. 3 knocks, slow and heavy, coming from the front gate. No one came to his farm at night, not in this weather. Not in this quiet corner of earth. He grabbed his lantern, threw on his jacket, and stepped out. The rain was cold. Hitting his face like tiny needles, Jacob walked through the mud, his boots sinking slightly with every step. His gate stood wide open, swinging gently in the wind, and there, lying just beyond it, was her. At first, he thought it was a woman, but the closer he got, the more he saw she wasn't human. Not completely. Her skin glowed faint lavender, smooth like silk and shining with strange lines that moved under the skin. She had long, silver-white hair. Tangled and wet, her clothes were torn, a strange, alien fabric that looked both delicate and high-tech. She held her swollen belly tightly with both hands, breathing fast and shallow. A faint blue liquid blood leaked from a cut on her shoulder, glowing softly in the dark. "Hey," Jacob called, his voice caught in his throat. She looked up for a moment, her glowing blue eyes wide with fear. Then she collapsed completely, her body limp in the mud, without thinking. Jacob rushed forward. She was light, too light for someone so tall. She was burning hot, like she had a fever, but worse, she was shaking, whispering in a language he couldn't understand. Jacob looked down and saw something clutched in her hand, a cloth with a burning symbol glowing on it. He didn't know what it meant, but he felt cold inside just seeing it. He carried her into the house, pushing the door shut behind him with his foot. He laid her on the old sofa near the fireplace, lit the heat lamp, and wrapped her in thick blankets. She didn't wake up, just trembled and whispered softly. Her breathing was uneven, her face pale. Jacob stared at her, confused and worried. Where had she come from? Why was she alone? Why was she pregnant? And why had she come to his farm? He gently pulled away the blanket to check her injuries. The glowing cut on her arm was deep, but not bleeding anymore. Her other arm had strange black bruises, like someone had grabbed her hard. There were glowing lines across her belly, like veins lit from inside. Jacob stepped back, unsure. He wasn't a doctor, just a farmer. But she needed help, and there was no one else for miles. He walked into the kitchen, filled a bowl with warm water, and grabbed some clean cloth when he returned. She was crying softly in her sleep. Her hands clutched her belly protectively. She whispered one word, "Vaughn," then went quiet again as he wiped her wounds. Lightning flashed through the window, and Jacob saw something that made him freeze. Outside, in the distance beyond the wheat fields, something moved. It was tall, thin, and walking strangely fast. But not human, just a black shape against the lightning for a second, then gone. Jacob walked to the door and locked it. Then he shut the curtains and turned off all lights except the one near the fireplace. He grabbed the old hunting rifle from under his bed. He hadn't used it in years, but tonight felt different. He could feel something in his bones. Danger. The alien woman shifted on the couch, her hand falling to the floor. Jacob saw the burning cloth slip from her grip. He picked it up, careful not to touch the glowing symbol directly. It burned like it was alive, and the symbol pulsed like a heartbeat. This wasn't just some lost traveler she was running from. Something powerful. Jacob sat down in the chair across from her, his rifle close by. The fire crackled softly, and the rain hit the roof in heavy waves. Whatever had brought her here was still out there, and now it knew where she was. Jacob didn't know who she was or what kind of child she carried. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let her die here. The rain had stopped just before dawn, but the air was still heavy and cold. Jacob hadn't slept. He sat by the fire all night, watching the strange woman breathe. She hadn't woken, but her body moved with soft trembles, and sometimes her hands tightened over her stomach, like she was protecting it even in sleep. Her skin no longer glowed as brightly, but it still shimmered with soft lavender light in the dim room. Jacob quietly poured warm water into a bowl again and checked her wounds. The cut on her arm looked different. The skin around it was already closing. It healed too fast, not like any human wound he had seen. The glowing blue blood had dried into tiny crystals. Even the bruises on her arms had faded, but her breathing was still uneven. She gasped suddenly, and her eyes snapped open, glowing blue and wide with fear. She sat up fast and looked around. Jacob raised his hands slowly. "It's all right. You're safe now," he said gently, but she didn't understand. Her gaze locked onto the window, then the door, then her belly. She gripped it tightly, curling slightly forward, as if expecting to be attacked again. She whispered something. Her voice cracked and weakened. It sounded like a name. Jacob shook his head. "I don't know what you're saying, but you're safe here." She looked at him, her eyes full of panic and confusion. Then her body swayed, and she fell back onto the couch, shaking. He rushed to her side and placed a blanket over her again. Her lips moved slowly, like she was trying hard to form words. Whom, she said at last, struggling with the shape of the word. Jacob froze, surprised. She pointed to herself, her chest rising and falling quickly. "Hunted. Child. Danger," she said in broken, slow words. Then she passed out again. Jacob sat there for a long moment, heart beating faster than it should. He looked toward the window, remembering the tall shape that had moved through the field. Was it still out there? Was it looking for her? He stood, went outside, and walked the edge of the field with his flashlight. In the soft morning light, he found something. Tracks, but not like his own. Thin and long, almost bird-like, with sharp points at the end and deep whatever it was. It was heavy. Back inside the house, the woman was still asleep. Jacob knew his place was no longer just a quiet farm. He grabbed tools from the shed and began fixing up the old barn behind the house. He cleaned out the dust, laid down blankets, and brought over water and food if something dangerous was hunting her. She couldn't stay in the open. When he returned to the house, she was awake again. Barely sitting up, her voice was weak, but clearer this time. "I run. They come, I protect," she said, pointing to her belly again. "Who's coming?" Jacob asked, leaning closer. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Hunters. Black masks. No mercy." Jacob swallowed hard. Whoever they were. They had chased her across stars. Now she was here, on his land, in his home, and they might be coming for him too. He helped her stand slowly. She winced, but didn't cry out. Her strength was returning, but not fully. He guided her to the barn and laid her down on the soft blankets he had prepared. She looked around, her glowing eyes full of pain and something else. Before leaving, Jacob turned to her. "My name's Jacob," he said softly. She looked at him for a second, then nodded. "Riha," she said, placing a hand on her belly. "Name." "Rhea." He closed the barn door gently and walked back to the house. But as the wind picked up again and the clouds darkened, Jacob didn't see the small blinking device hidden under Rhea's cloak. Its light was flashing red, and somewhere, far above Earth, something saw it. The sky turned orange that evening, thick clouds rolling like waves across the land. Jacob stood at the edge of the wheat field, shotgun slung over his back, eyes watching the tree line. Something was wrong. The birds were silent, and the wind had a smell metallic and strange. He had lived alone for years, but his instincts had never screamed this loudly. Inside the barn, Rhea sat with her back against the wall. Arms wrapped around her belly, her eyes were half closed, glowing dimmer than before. Jacob had given her some fruit and clean water, but she barely touched it. She stared at the small flashing device she had hidden under the blanket. Her lips tight with worry, the signal had gone out. She had hoped no one would track it this far, but she knew better. Her kind, the elite pursuers from House Shernak, never stopped once they marked a target. She was no longer one of them, and the child inside her, half-human, half-royal, was considered an unforgivable mistake. They would come, and they would burn everything to find her. Jacob returned just before nightfall, carrying a bucket of water and an old radio. No storm alerts. But I've got a feeling we're about to get more than rain, he said quietly. Rhea looked up at him, her breathing shallow. Jacob. She said his name slowly, learning the shape of it. They. Close now. How close? He asked, setting the radio down, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something beyond his hearing. Then she pointed to the sky. Jacob followed her gaze and saw it, a small, dark shape cutting across the clouds, silent and fast, like a needle slicing the horizon. Not a plane, not from Earth. He stepped back, heart racing. They know you're here, he asked. Yes, she whispered, child. Not allowed to live? Jacob clenched his jaw. That ain't their decision to make. That night, Jacob moved her from the barn to the hidden cellar beneath his home. It hadn't been used since his father's time, but it was dry, silent, and safe. Rhea said nothing as he led her down the wooden stairs. She was weak again, as if just being near the sky made her sicker. He laid blankets and food inside, then locked the hatch and placed a wooden crate on top. Back upstairs, he turned off all lights, stood by the window, and waited. And then they came. 3 figures walked across the field without making a sound. They were tall, wearing black cloaks that didn't flap in the wind. Their faces were hidden behind smooth metal masks. They moved with the grace of hunters, stepping between rows of wheat like they already owned the place. Jacob didn't move. He held his breath as they reached the gate, looked at the mud-stained ground, then turned their heads toward the barn. One of them raised a hand, and the barn door exploded inward. With a flash of green light, they stepped inside, weapons drawn sharp, humming spears that flickered with red energy. Seconds later, they stepped out, empty-handed. One of them turned toward the house. Tilting its head as if sniffing the air, Jacob raised the shotgun slowly. Breath steady, but then they turned. All 3 stopped. As if hearing something from far away, one of them touched the side of its mask, and a deep pulse echoed across the farm. It shook the window slightly, and the lights flickered. Then, without a word, they vanished into the wheat. No sound, no flash, just gone, like shadows returning to the dark. Jacob stood frozen for a full minute, hand gripping the gun so tightly his knuckles turned white. Then he ran to the cellar, threw open the hatch, and climbed down. Rhea was awake, tears in her eyes. She didn't ask what happened, she already knew. They will come back, she said softly. With more, Jacob nodded. Then we'll be ready, he said, his voice firm. He didn't know what kind of war he was stepping into, but he had already made a choice. He was going to protect her and the child, even if it meant standing alone against the stars. The silence didn't last. It was just past midnight again when the wind changed. Jacob had been repairing the back fences when he felt it, a sudden pressure in the air. Like a storm was coming, but the sky was clear. He dropped the hammer, turned, and saw the glow, far beyond the tree line, pulsing like a heartbeat. A red light slowly rising from the earth. He grabbed the binoculars and stared. A ship's leak, black and low, was lowering from the clouds. It made no sound, but the wheat near it was flattening, crushed by invisible force inside the hidden cellar. Rhea stirred from sleep. her skin flickering with faint bioluminescence. She gasped, holding her belly as if something inside her had twisted suddenly. "Coming," she whispered to herself. "They come with blades." Jacob rushed down the stairs, sweat on his brow despite the cold. "They're back," he said. And this time they brought a damn ship. Riha didn't speak. Her glowing eyes locked onto the floor above her head. Jacob looked at her, then at the child she carried. "I'll hold them off," he said, not knowing if that was brave or stupid. "Stay hidden no matter what." He climbed back up, grabbed every weapon he had: shotgun, hunting knife, a flare gun, and the old mining explosives he'd once used to clear a sinkhole on the property. He worked fast, planting charges along the outer fence, covering the house in darkness, and setting the trap lines through the wheat rows. He had no training, just instinct and desperation. But sometimes that's enough. The first shadow appeared near the barn. It was tall and fast, barely visible, moving with inhuman speed. Jacob held his breath, watching from behind the old tractor. More followed, 6 in total, all in black armor, glowing faint red behind their masks. One of them raised a strange device. It buzzed, then clicked. They pointed to the house, and the others began to move. The trap line snapped. A sudden chain reaction lit up the field as 2 explosions tore through the wheat. Flames rose into the night, smoke covering the sky like curtains. Jacob used the confusion to strike. He fired at the lead hunter, the blast hitting square in the chest, knocking it backward. Another rushed him from the side, but he swung the shotgun like a bat, smashing the mask clean off. The thing underneath wasn't human. Or maybe it used to be, hissed with razor teeth and gray skin glowing with wires. They were fast, but Jacob had surprise and rage on his side. He kicked open the shed door and triggered the second charge. Flames burst again, sending 2 more flying through the air, but they kept coming. One leaped onto the porch, clawing at the front door. Another circled toward the back. They moved like wolves, surrounding prey. Riha stood in the cellar, eyes closed, breathing slow. She placed both hands on her belly, her skin glowing brighter with each breath. Then her lips parted, and she began to hum a low, strange sounds, soft but powerful. The walls vibrated, dust falling from the ceiling up above. The hunter that had touched the cellar hatch suddenly stopped. Its mask cracked, sparks shooting from the side. It let out a horrible cry and fell backward, twitching like a broken machine. Riha kept humming, her voice shaking the roots of the house. Jacob, bleeding from his arm, burst back into the kitchen. He dropped the empty shotgun and grabbed the flare gun. Only 2 hunters remained. One was climbing through the window, the other stepping over the burning fence. Jacob fired. The flare hit the creature in the face, exploding in white light. The other roared and leapt to Jacob, barely ducked as claws scraped across the wooden beam above his head. Then the house began to shake. A deep, pulsing energy filled the air, like something ancient had awakened beneath the floor. Jacob turned to the cellar door just in time to see it swing open. Riha was rising up, her body glowing like firelight. Underwater, her eyes were pure blue. No pupils, no whites, just raw energy. The last hunter hesitated, and that's when Riha raised her hand. A blast of light shot from her palm, not a weapon, but a sound like a scream wrapped in thunder. The hunter collapsed midair, armor cracking, limbs shaking before it hit the floor with a heavy thud. Jacob stared at her, breathing hard. Riha fell to her knees, weak again, her glow fading fast. "It's not over," she whispered. "We'll send more." Jacob nodded slowly. "But not tonight," he said, stepping over the wreckage and pulling her into his arms. "Tonight, we live." The fire had burned out by morning. Smoke still curled from the blackened barn and what remained of the back fence. The farmhouse stood battered but standing. Blood, some blue, some red stained the floorboards, and Jacob was down on one knee, His shirt ripped, arms shaking, trying to breathe. Rhea was in labor. She had not spoken since the last hunter fell. Her skin flickered weakly, her eyes half closed. And she barely responded when Jacob carried her back down into the cellar. But now she gripped his hand tightly, her whole body tense. A sound deep in her throat as the first wave of pain hit her. Jacob had never delivered a baby, but there was no time to call anyone, no one to trust. She wasn't just alien, she was being hunted, and the child inside her was more than just a baby. It was a secret, a threat, a symbol of something forbidden. A storm was forming again above the valley, thick, dark clouds rolling over the hills. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by the slow growl of thunder. Jacob lit every candle and oil lamp he had. Placing them around the cellar, he cleaned his hands, laid down clean sheets, and knelt beside her. "Rhea, can you hear me?" he asked. She nodded slowly, her breath shaky. "Child?" "Coming soon," she whispered. "Must be strong. You're not alone," Jacob said. "We'll get through this." She reached up, touching his cheek gently. Her skin hot like fire. "Protect. Even if I don't," she whispered. "No," he said firmly. "You're going to make it to outside." The wind began to howl, and rain slapped against the roof like claws. Somewhere out in the distance, a strange humming sound echoed. Signal, faint but clear. Another ship was on the way, maybe bigger than the last. But inside that cellar, none of that mattered for now. Jacob held Rhea's hand as she screamed, her body arching in pain. Blue light poured from her skin like soft lightning. Moving in waves along her arms and chest, her voice rose, echoing strangely in the stone walls. "Push, Rhea," Jacob said. "Come on, you've got this." She screamed again, then bit her. Lip hard, glowing tears falling down her cheeks. And then the air changed. A soft cry filled the room, not Rhea's, but something new, small, high-pitched, delicate, and strange, yet unmistakably alive. Jacob blinked in disbelief, his hands trembling as he lifted the child into his arms. The baby's skin shimmered softly. A light lavender glow with tiny blue veins pulsing under the surface. Its eyes opened bright silver, like moonlight, and it looked straight at him. It didn't cry again, it just stared, calm, aware. He wrapped it in the soft cloth Rhea had carried in her cloak, the one with the glowing symbol. Rhea, barely conscious, reached out. Jacob placed the baby in her arms. And for a moment, everything stopped. The wind outside faded. The thunder paused, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Rhea smiled. "Weak but true. She lives," she whispered. "My daughter lives." Jacob sat beside them, watching the two figures in the candlelight. The storm could come, ships could fall from the sky, but in that moment there was only peace. Then the radio crackled. A low voice cut through the static. "Mechanical and cold. Target confirmed. Ground signature located. Retrieval teams inbound." Jacob stood slowly, his hand reaching for the rifle. Rhea looked up at him, her eyes glowing again, not with fear this time, but with warning. "They will burn everything," she said, to erase her. "Then let them come," Jacob said, loading the final rounds into his weapon. His voice was low, steady. "I've already decided." He kissed the baby's forehead and nodded once to Rhea. Then he climbed back up the cellar stairs and locked the hatch. Behind him, the storm was waiting outside, and so was he. The first explosion came before sunrise. Jacob was standing on the roof of the house, soaked in cold rain, his rifle across his back. He had strung metal wires through the wheat rows, wired an old generator to pulse-charge the soil. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. The enemy's ship hovered above the tree line, silent and deadly. It was larger than the first, wide like a stingray, black with red veins glowing across its surface. 3 beams of red light scanned the field like searching eyes. Then came the hiss of descent. Figures dropped from the ship 6. Of them this time, but not like the others. These were bigger, fully armored, walking with heavy boots that made the earth shake. Their helmets clicked and hissed with every step. As if breathing in poison and spitting it out, Jacob stayed low, watching them spread out. They moved toward the barn first, not knowing it was already ashes and mud. One of them lifted a scanning device. It lit up instantly, pointing straight toward the house, down in the cellar. Rhea clutched her newborn close. She could feel them. Above, even without seeing, their energy was sharp, violent, like blades pressed into her skin. Her child whimpered softly. Eyes wide, not crying, but sensing, Rhea pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead and whispered ancient words. Above, a shadow passed by the window. Jacob didn't move, didn't flinch. He waited. Hidden behind the kitchen door, holding the detonator in his left hand. As soon as the first soldier stepped onto the porch, he clicked it. The ground outside erupted. The hidden charges buried in the flower beds exploded in a blinding flash. Wood splinters flew into the sky. Fire burst from the porch. The hunter was thrown through the air, its helmet ripped clean off, its body landing headfirst in the mud. The others turned fast, forming a triangle pattern. Weapons raised, Jacob ducked and fired from the window, hitting one in the shoulder. Sparks burst from the armor. But it didn't fall. Instead, it let out a roar deep and metallic and charged. Jacob ran to the hallway, heart pounding. The front wall exploded inward. Wood and fire flying in all directions. The kitchen filled with smoke as one of the creatures entered, stepping over debris like it was nothing. It scanned the room with glowing red eyes. Gun aimed at the floor. Jacob waited behind the pantry wall, listening when the steps got closer. He kicked the shelf forward and lunged. He stabbed the beast's leg with a broken shovel and fired point blank into its chest. It screamed and swung wildly, throwing Jacob across the room. Blood his own dripped from his forehead. He got up, staggering, vision blurry. The creature was still moving, slower now, but angry. Jacob grabbed a fire poker and swung it hard. Cracking the helmet in half, the alien collapsed, groaning, twitching outside. 2 more were circling the back of the house. They found the cellar door. One of them raised a plasma cutter and began slicing through the steel lock inside the cellar. Rhea's hands were glowing again. She held her daughter in one arm and reached toward the door with the other. Her voice changed, rising like a chant, full of power and sorrow. The child in her arms began to glow as well, not crying, just pulsing. Just as the lock was nearly cut, the metal glowed red, then it melted without heat. Without fire, just disintegrated into ash. The creature at the door screamed and stumbled back. Then its helmet cracked from the inside, its faceplate, shattering into pieces. Rhea didn't move from her spot. She was protecting her child now, with everything she had, not with weapons, but with will. Jacob crawled into the living room, dragging his injured leg behind him. He grabbed the last stick of dynamite from under the couch and held it like a prayer. "Come on," he whispered, lighting the fuse. One of the final 2 soldiers burst through the front door, armor steaming from the rain. Jacob smiled through, the blood on his lips, and threw it straight at its chest. The blast was deafening, and the room went white when the smoke cleared. Jacob was lying half buried in rubble. One ear was ringing, and his hands shook. He looked toward the cellar still closed, still untouched, and in that moment, he knew what he had become. He was no longer just a farmer. He was her shield, her wall, her last line, and he wasn't done yet. The smoke didn't clear for hours. Jacob lay still. The ceiling half collapsed above him, the rain leaking through the holes. His right leg was broken, ribs cracked, but he was alive, and the house what was left of it was quiet. He forced himself to crawl, fingers dragging across the floor as if pulling a mountain. Every breath hurt, but he didn't stop. He reached the cellar door and knocked twice. Weakly, there was no answer. He knocked again. This time, he heard movement. The hatch creaked open. A soft blue glow spilled into the ruined house. Riha appeared, holding her daughter. Her long hair wet from sweat, her skin dim but calm. She gasped when she saw Jacob bloody, burned, barely conscious. "No," she whispered. Falling to her knees beside him, he smiled weakly, one hand reaching toward her. "You? All right," he murmured. She nodded, pressing her forehead against his. "She is safe," Riha said, her voice shaking. "You saved her." Outside, the enemy ship was gone. Whatever signal they had followed had died with the last hunter. There would be no more attacks, not now, maybe not ever, but the cost had been high. Jacob was carried to the barn, what was left. Of it, Riha used the same energy that had once cracked a soldier's helmet to heal the worst of his wounds. Her hands glowed gently over his chest and leg, sealing the bleeding and easing the pain, but it drained her, and she nearly collapsed again afterward. Days passed, then a week. The farm was quiet again, but different. Something ancient now lived there. Wrapped in silence and promise, Jacob stood one morning with a walking stick, staring at the wheat fields. They would grow again. He'd make sure of it. Behind him, Riha sat on the porch with her daughter in her arms. The child now smiled, glowing eyes like starlight. "Curious and alive, she needs a name," Jacob said softly, turning toward them. Riha nodded. "You?" "Choose." Jacob looked at the girl, then back at the sky. He smiled. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope." Riha held the child close and whispered it like a blessing. In her language, it became something more Vorara, meaning light that refuses to die. The weeks turned to months. They built the house back together. Slowly, piece by piece, the galaxy remained quiet for now. But they knew the silence would not last forever. Hope would grow strong, and one day, questions would come. She would be hunted again, maybe feared, but she would never be alone. She had her mother, fierce and full of power. And she had Jacob, more than a protector, more than a human. He had become something rare in the galaxy, a symbol of defiance, not because of weapons, not because of strength, but because he had chosen to protect what was right without being asked, without needing a reason. Years later, when alien historians whispered about Earth and what lived there, they did not mention great armies or high-tech cities. They spoke instead of a burned-down farmhouse, a glowing child who should not have lived, and the wounded man who stood between her and death. They called him the Last Gate, because when every other door was closed to her, his was open, and in the quiet of the fields, under Earth's sky, Hope laughed for the first time. The sound reached farther than anyone knew, carried by wind, by stars, by memory. And somewhere, far away, the universe paused and listened.